going to be in Exodus 34. Exodus chapter 34. I want to take a minute to remember how we got here. Moses went up the mountain to meet with God to get the law. And while he was up there, Aaron and the people conspired to build an idol and to name it the God that brought us up out of Egypt. So God suggested to Moses that perhaps the best thing to do would be to wipe out all of those people down in the valley and just start over with Moses and rebuild the nation of Israel through him. Moses negotiated with God on behalf of the people, and God changed his mind and reduced the sentence. He said, I will send you on to the land of Canaan, but I won't go with you. I'll send an angel to lead you, to show you the way, but I won't be with you. Moses again goes to God and negotiates on behalf of the people, and God decides that he will indeed go with them. He will not send them on without him. So Moses is on a winning streak, and Moses says, I want to see you. I want to actually see God. The answer that he gets is, you can see from behind, but no man can see my face and live. So God's plan is that he will put Moses in the small of a rock, in the cleft of a rock, and he will pass by him and hold his hand over Moses so that Moses can't see him. And when he gets by, then Moses can watch him leave, and that's the best he can do for Moses. But I don't know of any of us that wouldn't take that deal if we could get it, to actually get to see any part of a physical representation of God. But what's the problem with wanting a physical representation of God, wanting to see God? Well, one of the things that has become a problem through the years is trying to make an idol out of that image, trying to imitate it or come up with some way to artistically represent it. One of my favorite places that I'll probably never get to go, but I go online and visit it every now and then, is a monastery at the foot of Mount Sinai. And inside that monastery is the largest collection of icons. And an icon is a painting of the face of Jesus, typically on wood. And so they have the largest collection in the world. And I would love to go and see all of these attempts at trying to capture the image of Jesus. I doubt if any of them are 100% accurate. Some of them may catch nuances here and there, you just don't know. But when we make the physical more important than the spiritual, a lot of times when we cross that line, we end up in problems. But in the beginning of chapter 34, Moses is called back up to the mountain to kind of undo and redo what was supposed to happen the first time. You remember, God gave him the tablets. He went down with the tablets. When he saw what was going on in the valley, he broke those tablets. And so now we've got to have another set of tablets at least, and there's some other things that are really interesting in chapter 34. The Lord said to Moses, chisel out 2 stone tablets like the first ones, and I will write on them the words that were on the first tablets, the ones you broke. Be ready in the morning, and then come up to Mount Sinai. Present yourself to me on top of the mountain. No one is to come with you or be seen anywhere on the mountain. Not even the flocks and the herds may graze in front of the mountain. So Moses chiseled out 2 stone tablets like the first ones, and went up Mount Sinai early in the morning as the Lord commanded him. He carried the 2 stone tablets in his hands. Then the Lord came down in the cloud and stood there with him and proclaimed his name, the Lord. We're familiar with that part of his name. We've run into capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D before. That is a way to get around writing the Tetragrammaton, the 4-letter YHWH, name of God, because the Israelites and the translators of the Old Testament were determined not to take the name of the Lord in vain, and so they wouldn't speak it. They didn't want to write it down. So they used this L, capital O, capital R, capital D, the way we translate it, to represent the name that he says. It's the same thing that he told Moses on the mountain where we were at the burning bush. Right? Tell them that I sent you, the I am, the one who was and who is to come, as it shows up in Revelation. So he proclaims his name, the Lord. But before we get into verse 6, I want you to notice how Moses is called up there. Number one, he has to make his own tablets. Right? The first tablets were provided for him. This time, Moses, you broke the tablets. You bring me some more tablets. Now, the God of all creation would have no problem bringing into existence stone tablets, importing tablets from anywhere in the world. At the thought of it, immediately there would be tablets. Why make Moses bring the tablets? Moses broke something sacred. These were not, like little kids in class. They break a crayon, and you say, well, I'm not going to give you any more crayons. You'll have to ask your mama and bring some from home. It's a crayon. Moses broke the tablets that God himself took out of the rock and wrote on. Moses broke something really important. And God says, okay, you make some more tablets. You hew them out of the rock. They'll be more important to you if you do the hewing out of the rock. If you bring them to me, if you have to carry the rocks up the mountain and then bring them to me to write on, they'll be more important to you. So Moses has a little bit of a price to pay, even though it wasn't his fault that Aaron made the idol. It wasn't his fault that people were doing what they were doing. But in his anger, he throws down something sacred and breaks it. Now, I'm not going to preach the sermon, but you just make one up. Is that not a great subject for a sermon? You've got something sacred in your hands, and your anger makes you destroy the something sacred that was in your hands. How many marriages have you seen that were destroyed because of anger? How many relationships, how many churches have been torn apart? Something sacred, something beautiful, for the sake of somebody's immediate burst of anger. So Moses has to bring his own tablets.
When Moses came down from that mountain with them tablets, what made him so angry was the people.
Oh, yeah.
And turned back to idols and all that stuff.
Yeah, there's no doubt he had a reason to be mad. And again, I'm not going to preach the sermon, but there's a lot of families and a lot of husbands, a lot of wives, they have a reason to be mad. Yeah. The problem isn't that there's no reason to be mad. The problem is they let their anger take over and they let something sacred get away from them because of a fit of anger. All right, I want to get into verse 6. In verse 6, God goes past the pronouncing of his name, and he gives more identification. Now, for those of you that are coming on Wednesday nights, we're in Revelation. We looked at Revelation chapter 1, and John identified who Jesus was, and then he sees a vision of who Jesus is, and then Jesus tells him more. He identifies himself even more of who he is. Jesus begins writing letters to the 7 churches in chapters 2 and 3, and at the beginning of each of these letters, Jesus describes himself in different ways. So there's kind of man's viewpoint of who God is, and there's God's viewpoint of who God is. So beginning in verse 6, we actually have God describing himself, right? Not physically, that's not the important thing, but who is God spiritually, okay? As he passed in front of Moses, he proclaimed, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining his love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Isn't that a good description? A lot of people that I know, and a lot of current religious trend, like that definition. All of that definition is about God likes us. Right? God's forgiving. God goes out of his way to make sure we're okay. If you read a lot of Facebook, if you read a lot of newspaper clippings, if anybody that's writing or talking about God typically gives you that description. But look at the rest of his description. He's told you who he is to those that love him. And then he says, but he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation. That's tough, right? When you start out with, he is a God that maintains love for thousands, forgives wickedness, he forgives rebellion, he forgives sins. That's the God we want. But then he says, but, however, although, on the other hand, those who are against me, I don't hold guiltless. And he says something that we don't want him to say, and we need to talk about it for just a minute. And that is, if you are against me, not only do I chastise you, but your kids and your grandkids. I went back to find the passage. It's in Ezekiel 18. If you'll run over and look at that one. Ezekiel 18, we'll start in verse 1. Evidently, as a result of that passage, God's description of himself being available to the people, they came up with a saying. And the saying was, the parents eat sour grapes, and the children's teeth are set on edge. Like father, like son, chip off the old block, etc., etc. Right? So here's what Ezekiel was told to tell the children of Israel. The word of the Lord came to me. What do you people mean by quoting this proverb about the land of Israel? The parents eat sour grapes, and the children's teeth are set on edge. As surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, you will no longer quote this proverb in Israel, for everyone belongs to me, the parent as well as the child. Both alike belong to me. The one who sins is the one who will die. And then he gives a couple of what ifs. What if there's a godly father who has an ungodly child? The father's not responsible. If there's an ungodly father who has a godly child, the father doesn't get credit because the child is godly. Everyone stands before the Lord on their own. So what does God mean when he says, I hold it over even the second and the third generation? I went looking through some commentaries to see if somebody smart knew the answer. It's a difficult question. The best answer I got was that there are some things that you do that simply affect more generations than your own, and that God is going to hold them responsible as they follow in your footsteps. Not necessarily that you did something and God is going to keep bringing it back up to future generations even if they don't sin. But if you start a trend, if you set in motion a family tradition, I just got Hank Williams Jr. in my mind, right? Why you get on me and say, Hank, why do you drink? Why do you roll smoke? Well, I'm just carrying on a family tradition. That doesn't excuse anything, does it? No. If the father does something sinful and the child does something sinful and the grandchild does something sinful, then there's a habitual generational problem that's going on. So that may be the best explanation, that God remembers, these family groups, and unless the family group changes, then he's going to continue to hold it over those who do evil. It's also a good way to keep people from getting in too deep, right? As a parent, I might do something if it was only me who was going to pay for it. But when you start talking to me about, okay, if you keep doing that, it's going to hurt Beth. It's going to hurt Elena, and it's going to hurt, what's that kid's name? Melody. Bootsy. It's going to hurt Bootsy. If that is brought up, there's more reason for me to stop doing whatever it is I'm doing. I want them to be safe as much or maybe even more than I want myself to be safe. So what Ezekiel says in chapter 18 obviously holds true. God looks at each individual, but sometimes there are family groups who have traditions that are not in keeping with God. It happens, read the book of Judges, you'll have a good generation and then kind of a bad generation, a good generation, a bad generation. And when the Lord delivers them, a lot of times they'll have things will go well for 40 years. Right? And in 40 years, we've got the generation that he saved and another generation born and the third generation born. If they don't make changes, it slides back down to where it was before. So huge, tremendously important for us as parents, grandparents, influencers in the community, when we have the opportunity to change that system. If a kid is stuck in a system of a family life and they need help, we need to be willing to encourage them toward Christ. We need to be able to encourage them toward better morality. Theirs might be the generation that makes the change. Anyway, I'll let that sit. Let's go to back to chapter 34. Exodus 34, and we're going to start reading in verse 8. Moses bowed to the ground at once, and he worshiped. Lord, he said, if I have found favor in your eyes, then let the Lord go with us. Although this is a stiff-necked people, forgive our wickedness and our sin, and take us as your inheritance. Then the Lord said, I am making a covenant with you. Before all your people I will do wonders never before done in any nation in all the world. The people you live among will see how awesome is the work that I, the Lord, will do for you. And I want to stop just long enough to say I love the fact that God referred to himself as awesome. Right? You sing the song, Our God is an Awesome God, right? God owns that. He says, I want you to know, I'm going to do some things while I'm leading you into Canaan that nobody could ever imagine. Nobody's ever seen anything like what's about to happen, and it's going to be awesome. Obey what I have commanded you today. I will drive out before you the Amorites, Canaanites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. Be careful not to make a treaty with those who live in the land where you're going, or they will be a snare among you. Break down their altars, smash down their sacred stones, cut down their Asherah poles. Do not worship any other god, for the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. So he says, okay, I'm awesome and I'm jealous. Okay? Be careful not to make a treaty with any of those who live in the land, for when they prostitute themselves to their gods and sacrifice to them, they will invite you, and you will eat their sacrifices. And when you choose some of their daughters as wives for your sons, and those daughters prostitute themselves to their gods, they will lead your sons to do the same thing. How big an influence is your marriage relationship? All right? So if you make friends and marry into the pagan lifestyle, how much will you be drawn away into idol worship? I want to look at a couple of passages in the New Testament. This wasn't something that just happened in the desert. This was something that the Israelites battled with all through their existence. It was a huge problem after they got into Canaan. They didn't displace all the other nations as they should have. And they did intermarry. They did all these things that God's talking about. It caused them great problems. But I just want us to look at a couple of places that have to do with eating food that had been offered to idols. Right? We're starting 1 Corinthians, let's go to 8 first. The Corinthians had a big problem with this. He mentions it 2 times in the letter to Corinth. He mentions it in the letter to the Romans. Lots of problems in that generation with people eating food that had been offered to idols. The first thing that God tells Moses is, I don't want you to get into community fellowship with these people. I don't want you to eat at their feasts. You know, when they invite you over for dinner, you need to be cautious about that, because that's where the problem is going to start. If you just intermingle and become part of them, then when it comes marrying time, you're going to have a much harder time not giving your sons to their daughters or giving your daughters to their sons. So just keep a separation there. Don't become just part of the group. All right? 1 Corinthians chapter 8, and we would have to read the whole chapter, which we really don't have time to do. So let me just kind of pick a couple of places to look at. Okay, he begins by saying that eating meat offered to an idol is not necessarily a sin in itself. Okay? The food itself is nothing. People who are spiritually mature know that a hunk of meat is a hunk of meat, and if you're eating a steak, the fact that it was offered to Zeus the day before doesn't mean that you're worshiping Zeus. However, look at verse 9. Be careful that the exercise of your rights does not become a stumbling block to the weak. If someone with a weak conscience sees you with all of your knowledge eating in an idol's temple, won't that person be emboldened to eat what is sacrificed to idols? So this weak brother or sister for whom Christ died is destroyed by your knowledge. When you sin against them in this way and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if what I eat causes my brother or sister to fall into sin, I will never eat meat again, so that I will not cause them to fall. And of course, he's speaking in hyperbole. He's not actually saying I'm going to become a vegetarian tomorrow. But he's saying, I want you to know that my brethren are more important to me than being able to eat with my friends. And my friends say, well, hey, let's go to a temple to eat. And you know it's just meat. You're not worshiping Zeus. But what if your brother sees you doing that? What if your sister, who really has problems with that, sees you doing it? Not only do they look down on you because you're doing something they consider to be sinful, but it gives them a sense that maybe they're wrong and you're right. Maybe it would be okay. And they end up sinning against their own conscience. Chapter 10. Starting in verse 23. And again, Paul's talking about freedom. Paul says, I have the right to do anything. You say, but not everything is beneficial. I have the right to do anything, but not everything is constructive. So no one should seek their own good, but the good of others. Eat anything sold in the meat market without raising questions of conscience, for the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. So you're in Corinth, you're going down the agora, you're buying your groceries for the week, and there's all these little stalls with all these things, and there's a sale on rump roast, and you just need a rump roast. So you stop by and you're going to get a rump roast, and they say, this is the best rump roast in town. It's part of a sacrifice that was made to Zeus yesterday. Right? If they don't tell you that, you're good as gold. You don't have to know where it's been. Just take it home and eat it, right? Put some carrots and potatoes in there. Life is good. But if an unbeliever invites you to go to a meal and you want to go, you can eat anything you want without raising questions of conscience. But if someone says to you, this has been offered as a sacrifice, then don't eat it, both for the sake of the one who told you and for the sake of conscience. I'm not referring to the other person's conscience. I am referring to the other person's conscience, not yours. Why is my freedom being judged by another's conscience? If I take part in the meal with thankfulness, why am I denounced because of something I thank God for? So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all to the glory of God. Don't cause anyone to stumble, whether Jews or Greeks or the church of God, even as I try to please everyone in every way. I'm not seeking my own good, but the good of many, so that many can be saved. Right? He says you got to think. You got to make sure that the way you approach these festivals and these meals and this interaction with other people, that you don't give them the slightest impression that you're okay with their God. So when God tells the Israelites in the wilderness, don't give them the slightest impression. In fact, when you get there, tear down their Asherah poles. Right? They would have high places with these trees planted. It was a fertility cult. Tear it down. Right? If you see a Baal idol, tear it down. Tear down their altars. Get rid of everything that smacks of their false religion. They can't have any sense that you're okay with it. Because if you do, then the generation behind you will find that to be normal. Right? And the generation behind them even more so. And you begin to just kind of blend in with all the people that are there. And little by little, you stop being you and start being them. Somebody asked me a question one time. I think it's a great question. How much How much of the church can we get into the world before we change the world? And how much of the world can come into the church before it stops being the church? God says it's okay to not be one of them. It's better to not just be one of them. So, and then Paul would say, you all have freedom. You all have knowledge. You understand your relationship with God, but maybe they don't. And you have to protect it. You have to protect their perception of you, and you have to protect your perception of yourself. Am I separate? I'm holy to the Lord, or am I just another somebody that's being part of the landscape? Still a good question for us today. That'll preach too, but I'm not going to preach that one tonight either. So, any questions, any thoughts? Okay. If there's any way we can help you by a public response, we'd love to do it as we sing.